Hello, my name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, I'm Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. This morning, I want to introduce to you the beginning of a panel that I helped to coordinate and organize for the Harvard Business Alumni Association. And it was a group of people, three of which, myself included, attended Harvard, and also a person who had attended Yale University, all of whom participate in something called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence. And they are going to be talking with me about why emotional intelligence continues to be growing in stature and importance. It's one of those phenomenons that hasn't gone away. And I'd like you to hear from other people about why it has such continuing staying power and why it's important to learn about and to become better at. I'll just introduce really one of the speakers, a fellow named Carey Chernus, who was the former director of the consortium. He actually started the consortium, ran it with Dan Goleman for 25 years. I want you to hear from Carey about a book that he wrote, the strategies that leaders use to engage in emotional intelligence to produce more engagement with the workforce, better productivity, more trust. So I'll talk a bit about that in the beginning of the panel discussion, and you'll hear Carey talk about it later. And then afterwards, I want to introduce to you three business people that have worked with me and have listened to the Emotion Roadmap being presented and then learned how to present it themselves to their clients, to their families, to their workforce, and the ways they have benefited. So that's how I'll end the show. And I want to impress upon you the reason why emotional intelligence is so important. At the same time, I also want to get you to understand how you can become better at it. No matter what your skill set is to start, you can become better at it. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's show.
Most importantly, Chuck has helped us organize this panel tonight. Thank you very much, Chuck.
Thanks very much. I wanted to just simply say that I'm interested in tonight's conversation in part because of something similar to what Dan Goleman wrote about very recently. If you haven't seen it, Dan wrote about what we still to get wrong about emotional intelligence in a Harvard Business Review article recently. And one of the concerns I had, if you read the description, is that we basically have a very narrow definition of what we think emotional intelligence is. Many people simply think it's being nice to another person. It's being thoughtful. It's being empathic when somebody's had a loss of some kind. And it is. It's all of those things, but it's so much more. And we've always had an interest in emotions. The emotions associated with love, with power, with justice, with conflict, with influence, family, work, community, nation, they're all well known to us. But actually how emotional intelligence plays a role in how we respond and behave, that's not so clear. And I hope to make that much more clear tonight with the panelists that I've gathered together tonight. Colleagues and friends, we have with us Carey Chernus, Helen Reese, and Richard Boyatzis, all who are members of what's called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. And Carey was a co-founder of that organization with Dan Goleman. We'll say a little bit more about that a little later on. But as we get ready, I just want to mention that we've been talking about emotions for a long time, even as early as Aristotle. And I'd just like to read, this is a quote that Aristotle is known to have said. Anybody can become angry. It is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. So even as early as Aristotle, people were writing about emotions. But in the 1990, there was two psychologists, one's Peter Salovey, who's now Yale president, and his colleague and friend, Jack Mayer, a University of New Hampshire psychologist and professor there. They discovered that we have what they call emotional abilities. So when we say what Aristotle said about anger, it's possible that some people can be angry with the right person in the right way at the right time because they're more skilled at it. They have more ability than somebody else. What these authors said, Salovey and Mayer, was that there are emotional abilities, the ability to identify, use, and understand emotions. And they wrote about it. But it wasn't really popularized until Dan Goleman wrote his book in 1995 called Emotional Intelligence. And as a subtitle, it said why it might matter more than IQ. And at the time, it got a lot of attention because for those of you that might have read the book or heard about it, there was a book called The Bell Curve. And it was a very controversial book. Basically said, if you don't have a high IQ, you're not going to do well in life. And here was Dan Goleman talking about what, in some ways, Peter and Jack had discovered, but other things he had learned and written about as well. And so because the bell curve was out there saying IQ is all that's important or most important, and Dan saying, oh, wait a minute, there's another intelligence out there that might be more important, it got some attention at that time. Got a lot of attention, in fact. But it also wasn't just because the bell curve was out there. It was because Dan's a really good writer. And Dan captured the world's imagination with his book. And a lot of people got really excited about that. And then from there, a lot of things started to happen. But even with most new ideas, when a new idea emerges, it's often popular for 1 to 5 years, maybe even 10. But remember, that was 1995. And we're still talking about it. Not only we're talking about it, but interest is soaring. And why is that the case? In a forum I belong to, I just recently joined on Facebook, just called Emotional Intelligence. Someone asked the question, so if I get better at emotional intelligence, what will be different? That was a great question, so I started to answer it. I said, well, you'll be better at parenting, you'll be better at leadership, you'll be a better teammate. And then as I started to write, I couldn't stop. You'll be better at relationships, at conflict, at decision-making, at strategy. I mean, really, it's almost, what wouldn't you be better at if you were more in control of your own emotions and you understood the things that you do and the things that you say and how it impacts other people's emotions? How could you not be better at almost everything, really? And so I've brought this panel together to help us to explore what this is all about. One of the things that I'll tell you about Carey Chernis is that he's just written a book. I just finished it for last year. It was published called Leading with Feeling. And he uncovered through a series of interviews and research with a colleague of his, 9 strategies for how people lead. And for Helen Reese, one of the things that she's done is she's done a world of wonderful research in the area of empathy. I think Helen's one of the world's greatest authorities on empathy. And she actually has shown some actual research that demonstrates that patients get better. There are better patient outcomes when healthcare professionals and practitioners are more skilled at empathy. And Richard Boyatzis, well known for his early work in the field of competencies, and then worked and partnered with Dan Goleman to write the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory to measure emotional and social competencies. But Richard also wrote a book recently called Helping People Change that has this wonderful idea about how to coach others with compassion instead of coaching them for compliance. And he'll share that and some of his really wonderful ideas around intentional change theory. And for myself, I'll be talking to you about the emotion roadmap, which is this idea that all of us can become better, no matter what our skill levels are, at dealing more effectively with other people's emotions, being able to influence and motivate other people more effectively, and also to have more inner peace because we're able to be able to control more and manage our own emotions more ourselves. And I've asked each of them to tell you a little bit more about their work when they talk about their work, about how you can find out more, because tonight we won't have enough time to talk a lot in depth about any of these ideas, but I hope it encourages everybody that's on this call with us to want to learn more, to want to do more, become better at emotional intelligence and improve in the ways you can. The world's in a tough place, as all of you know, for lots of reasons. And some pretty unusual reasons, but still lots of challenges. And we're facing them all the time, really. We've had challenges throughout the world's history. But I think the better we become more adept at emotional intelligence, the better we'll be able to respond to those challenges. So let me go to Carrie Chernis first. I want to introduce Carrie. And I want to just say a little bit about Carrie. I want to read you a little bit about Carrie. And in talking about Carrie, I thought about Carrie's work is with leaders, and he's done a lot of things, really, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But in terms of an anecdote to share about some of my work with leaders, I want to tell you about a woman named Marsha, who is a senior vice president in a large insurance company, and I was asked to work with for a compliance issue. She was having a rough time with some of her relationships with people who did the support work, the backroom work for a sales organization that she was in charge of. I actually assessed her. There are assessments that measure emotional intelligence. And one of those assessments is called the Mesquite. That's the Mayer Salve Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, and found that she was actually very skilled in her emotional abilities. She had high levels of intellectual empathy, understanding why emotions happen. She had really high levels of emotional empathy, felt what other people felt. But over time, as I gained her trust, I realized that she felt that the people in the backroom operation that didn't report to her, she wanted to report to her. And so she was cold and demanding, but she wasn't very friendly, even though she had the potential, and actually in her sales organization was known for really warm and effective relationship skills. Once I was able to work with her and help her to understand how important it might be to be able to use those relationship skills with her workforce, she actually decided that she would go to her peer who she had some struggles with, didn't like, but asked if it would be okay if she started to meet with the support teams. And the woman said, sure, sounds like a good idea. And over time, she developed a wonderful relationship with the support teams, actually got friendly with the peer who had been a challenge before, and within a year's time was promoted to president. So my point is that you can learn how to use your emotional intelligence skills, even if it doesn't always come naturally. And now I want to introduce Carrie, who's going to tell you about some of the things he discovered when people are gifted with this already. So let me read you a little bit about Carrie Chernis. Carrie is a PhD and emeritus professor of applied psychology at Rutgers University and co-chair of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. He specializes in the areas of emotional intelligence, work stress and burnout, leadership in organizations, and planned organizational change. He has published over 60 scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as 8 books, including The Emotionally Intelligent Workplace with Dan Goleman, Promoting Emotional Intelligence in Organizations, Guidelines for Practitioners with Mitchell Adler, and The Human Side of Corporate Competitiveness with Daniel Fishman. His most recent book that was published is Leading with Feeling, 9 Strategies for Emotionally Intelligent Leaders with Cornelia Roach. Dr. Chernis also has consulted with many organizations in both the public and private sectors, including American Express, Johnson & Johnson, AT&T, and the United States Office of Personnel Management. So Carrie, you're up.
Thanks, Chuck. That was a wonderful introduction, not only to the panel, but also, I think, for the concept of emotional intelligence in general. So what I'd like to do is to take a couple of minutes to clarify what we mean by emotional intelligence, and then talk a little bit about what the research says about the relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness, and then finish up sharing with you a couple of things that we learned from the research that Chuck just described. So in terms of emotional intelligence, I think Chuck did a good job of describing what it is. The textbook definition of emotional intelligence is that it's the ability to accurately perceive, understand, and manage our own emotions and those of others. Again, the ability to perceive, understand, and manage our own emotions and those of others. So let me give you an example of one of the leaders that we studied, a situation that she described to us, which I think really illustrates what emotional intelligence is all about. She is and was the CEO of a medium-sized engineering and architectural consulting firm. And the firm had been going through some very hard times. They had laid off people for the first time in the history of the firm. And so for a number of weeks, when she met each Friday with her leadership team, the news was pretty much uniformly bad. And then one week, she noticed a change. One of the team members, I guess it was the chief financial officer, gave a report that was actually pretty promising. But when he finished, the group almost immediately was ready to move on to another topic. And when she realized that they were not going to talk about, this wonderful news, she said, "Wait a second, you guys, this is really wonderful. This is the first good news we've had in weeks. Let's stop and take a couple of minutes to, talk about why things seem to be looking up." And so that's what they did. And as they were talking about, what they had done to make things start to improve, the whole emotional atmosphere really began to lift. And when they moved on to the next topic, that positive climate continued. And at the end of the meeting, when the team left that room, they were feeling much better about the way things were going. And we know from research on emotional contagion that within a very short period of time, that more positive outlook spread through the entire organization. So what does this have to do with emotional intelligence? Well, first of all, she was using one of the strategies that we identified in our research, and I'll talk more about the research in a minute. And that was, she was almost continually monitoring the emotional climate of the meeting. And so when the group was moving on to the next topic without any discernible change in the emotional climate, the CEO understood that this was really a lost opportunity, and that she really should do something to try and get them to go back and talk about the good news. And so that's what she did very skillfully. She said, "Hey, wait a second, let's talk more about that." So those are the three basic dimensions of emotional intelligence: the ability to accurately perceive emotions, to understand the dynamics, and then to use your emotional intelligence skills to manage and often change those emotions. Okay, so that's what emotional intelligence is. And that particular incident, it seemed to have a very positive effect on the organization, at least in terms of motivation. But I know a lot of you, like us, are primarily interested in, and have to be primarily interested in, the bottom line. So what do we know about the relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership and organizational effectiveness? Well, it turns out, I like to think in part because of the work of the consortium during the last 25 years, that there has been really a ton of research that's appeared, which shows pretty convincingly that there's a positive relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness. And I could spend the whole evening talking about the various studies, but what I want to do is just briefly describe one, which I think really, for me at least, kind of nails it. This is a study that was done a few years ago. I think it appeared in one of our referee journals in 2018. A group of researchers were interested in looking at all the research that had been done up to that point on the relationship between leadership effectiveness in different kinds of organizations and emotional intelligence. Was there really a positive relationship? Did more emotionally intelligent leaders have more effective, were they more effective as leaders? Were their organizations more effective? So as they were going through these studies, they were able to identify 12 different studies that independently looked at the relationship between a leader's emotional intelligence and not the leader's effectiveness, but the effectiveness of the leader's subordinates, their performance. And the question was, did the subordinates perform more effectively if they had a more emotionally intelligent leader? And they used a technique that many of you are probably familiar with called meta-analysis to statistically pool the results. And what they found, as I said, there were 12 studies. When you pooled them, there were over 2,700 leaders involved in the analysis. And they found that, in fact, there was a very positive relationship between a leader's emotional intelligence and the performance of the people that leader supervised. In fact, when they looked at the data more closely, they found that the leader's emotional intelligence accounted for about 23% of the variance in employee performance. And that is really huge. I mean, when you think about all the different factors that contribute to an employee's performance in an organization, previous experience and where they, were trained, and maybe even IQ a little bit, to have the leader's emotional intelligence contribute to almost a quarter of the variation. That, I think, is very powerful evidence for how important emotional intelligence is. So let me very briefly tell you a little bit about the research we did. As I said, there was a lot of research, and there's still more research accumulating on the relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness. And what I was interested in several years ago was a very different question, which I think is just as important, if not more important, for practitioners, for leaders. And that was, how do outstanding leaders use their emotional intelligence to get these very positive results? So we asked a small group of executive coaches, management consultants, to identify outstanding leaders who were not only outstanding, but also were seemed to be very effective in managing and using their emotions and those of others. And we ended up with a group of 25 mid-level and senior level executives, evenly divided between men and women, and very diverse in terms of the different kinds of organizations they came from. And we used a technique, an interview technique called a modified behavioral event interview, where we asked them at the beginning of each interview to think of some situations, some incidents in which they had to use and manage their emotions and the emotions of other people in order to accomplish their goals. And in the end, we ended up with 126 of these incidents. And as we were poring over the data and analyzing the data, what eventually emerged were these 9 strategies that Chuck referred to before, and that we mentioned in the title of our book. So let me just describe one of those incidents to you, which I think highlights a couple of those strategies. By the way, the first strategy is monitoring the emotional climate. A lot of the leaders we studied did this quite a bit, in fact, almost continuously. And the example I started with is an example of a leader using that strategy. But in the second example, we were interviewing the president of a wholesale beverage company and beverage distributor. And he described a situation in which he was having a very difficult time working with one of their major customers. He would meet with the major customers every year to renegotiate the contract. And he had done that several times with this individual. And somehow, every time the president of the company got so flustered and upset and agitated that, by the end, he came away with a really bad contract. This guy knew all the buttons to push. And so he was getting ready for his next visit and not looking forward to it, needless to say. And he was having lunch with one of his friends. This was an older executive who had really become kind of a mentor and coach to him. And he was describing what he had to do the next week, and asked, this other guy, do you have any suggestions? And the guy said, well, why do you always have to be the one to go? Well, why don't you ask one of your people to go in your place and let them deal with this guy and negotiate the contract? So that's what he did. And when the guy came back, it was by far the best contract they ever had with this customer. That incident, as I said, illustrated two more of our 9 strategies. The first one, and the one that frankly surprised us the most, is that he sought out help from other people. Now, the reason that was surprising is because these were the experts. These were 25 outstanding leaders, emotionally intelligent leaders. And yet here was one of them saying, what I did in this situation that made the difference was reaching out to a coach. And he really helped me. The other strategy he illustrated was modifying the interpersonal boundary as a way of managing emotions. A lot of the leaders we interviewed, and I know a lot of you who are listening to this, have good strategies, sort of internal cognitive strategies for managing your emotions. And he was using those. He had those. But no matter what he did, trying to, tell himself this isn't the end of the world, or, I can really handle this, or it didn't work. Well, another strategy that many of the leaders used was to change the interpersonal boundary. In this case, what he did was to create an interpersonal boundary that was really rigid and that involved having another person totally go and interact with this customer and negotiate the boundary. So those are some examples of the kinds of incidents that we came up with in the book and the strategies that we emerged with.
That concludes the segment with Carrie, and now I want to turn to the client work that I did, and you will meet 3 clients that I have worked with who have learned to benefit from the Emotion Roadmap.
But I want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this session this morning. Listen to the people that have just gone through an experience with me over several months where we've learned about our emotional abilities. So in a moment, as I said, I'd like to introduce you to Lois and to Tamara and to Robert. And each of them run their own businesses, but I'll say just a little bit about all of them. Lois, I had the chance to meet when I got to be a visiting professor for Dan Goleman. As many of you who know something about emotional intelligence have heard Dan's name. Dan's probably the most well-known author in the field. And Dan recently created a coaching program, and Lois was one of the first people to go through it. And I had a good fortune of being a colleague of Dan's and friendly with Dan, and I had the chance to go down and introduce the knowledge and the experience of teaching people how to use the Emotion Roadmap. And Lois is an interesting person to work with, in part because she went through Dan's entire program and then came on and worked with me on the Emotion Roadmap with a much deeper dive. And so this is a chance to listen about how I think what I've created is a useful tool for actually working with your emotions to manage them more effectively and to be able to influence others. So while a lot of programs that you might attend will teach you about your abilities in some ways, they don't necessarily teach you what to do different. And the emotion roadmap gives you a technique, methodology to do something different. And then Tamara I met in a very interesting circumstance, because through LinkedIn, as many of you probably have experienced, you find connections, and sometimes those connections materialize into actual work. And Kathy, a Vistage consultant who has worked with Tamara and her brother, was looking for someone to help with their business, a leadership coach who also had family systems training. And years ago, I used to be a family therapist. And so it was interesting to come in and meet James and Tamara and find that, yes, the skill set I have does seem to lend itself to the kinds of circumstances that they were facing. And so I've been working with Tamara in multiple ways. And in part, she went through this experience of learning about this MESCIT, the Mayer-Salve Crusoe Emotional Intelligence Test that measures abilities. And then also, as a coach, I've been working with Tamara as well. And Robert, I got to know because of his dad. Don Weintraub has been a friend of mine for a lot of years. We hadn't been in touch for a while, but again, I saw something that Don was doing, and I wrote him in LinkedIn that prompted me to think, hey, I ought to drop Don a note. And in talking with Don, we began talking not only about our own lives, but about our children's lives. And Robert is Don's son, and Robert's doing some really interesting things with people on the spectrum, if you will, and he can tell you more about that. But I thought, well, people on the spectrum often have a tremendous amount of difficulty with emotions, managing their own emotions and interacting with others. And I thought it might be interesting to talk to him just about the work that I'm doing and whether it might lend itself to that. And so in talking with Robert, we connected and seemed like a really good connection. And then since that moment, we've done some work together. And hopefully some of those things are helping Robert's clientele as well as Robert. And so that's it. So I'm going to now turn this over to Lois as the first person I met to talk a little bit about herself, a little bit about what she learned. Then it'll be followed by Tamara, then by Robert, and then just a little conversation amongst ourselves. So I hope you find this useful and practical and helpful in understanding how emotional intelligence can help you, as well as how it's helping the people that I've been working with. So Lois, you're up.
Thank you for having us today, Chuck. And it is a pleasure to get to talk about my experience and tell you a little bit about me. I own 3 different businesses, of which I'm all president of all 3. And one of them is a original equipment manufacturer distributor. And then the other one is a service company. We're a water treatment company. So we're taking care of your water and safeguarding your water. And then the third business is a coaching business. So I do executive coaching and help people with their culture. So that's a little bit about my professional side. And then, as Chuck had mentioned about the Daniel Goleman program where we got to meet, what I enjoyed about that program was I got to learn a lot about the different emotions, but I didn't necessarily get to learn how to do with what I learned about them. So going through this program with Chuck has given me a tool, a methodology, a process to be able to say, identify how I'm feeling, and if it is ideal or if it's not ideal, what would be ideal and how can I get there? It's also helped me suspend judgment of other people, because I used to believe that I would think people would be able to know when they're feeling a certain way or getting triggered because I could see it in them. But I realize now by going through this program that not everyone has that ability to sense how they're feeling and how they're coming across. So it's been a real eye-opener for me to examine the way I look at other individuals as they're processing their emotions.
So the emotion roadmap, this is this idea that sometimes the emotions we're feeling are not helpful. I mean, they're informative. They're always informative. Whatever we're feeling is usually designed to help protect us. And really, it's an evolutionary system. It's been out there forever. But at the same time, sometimes whatever we're feeling, like if we're angry, but we can't be angry in a certain situation, we just can't afford to be angry. What do we do about it? And if we're grieving, but grieving too long, and it's gone on past the time that might be considered normal, and we can't seem to get out of it, how do we change that? And so the idea of the roadmap was, if you're feeling a certain way and it's not helpful, ask yourself the question of what is ideal. Can you think of any? I know you've had a few instances, Lois, where is there a circumstance or a situation where you actually saw that concept work with a client or in a business setting that you might run or as a coach? Anything you can share?
Yeah, sure. I've got one in particular that comes to mind. I've used it a lot. She's my assistant for now. But I was working with a client who was struggling with having a conversation with a direct report. And I just started talking about the model and asked her, how do you feel about this? And she was, just very fearful of having it, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of how the other individual was going to respond. And so I went through the model and asked her, well, ideally, how would you like to feel? And so she said, well, I want to feel confident in a conversation, and I want to feel good when I'm having a conversation. So I asked her, ideally, how would you like this other individual to feel when they walk away? And she goes, well, I want them to feel understood. I want them to feel valued, and a number of other things. And so then I asked her, what are some of the things that you could do that will allow you to feel that way? And then what we did was we kind of went through some hypothetical conversations. Put yourself in this other individual's shoes. If you were them and you wanted to feel valued, what kind of words would you be using? And we went through that whole process, and she sent me an email a couple days later and said, I don't know what I was afraid of. She said, the model helped me. It was the best conversation I'd ever had. No need to reply, but I just want to let you know how wonderful that was. And again, she was like, I don't even know why I was afraid to have the conversation. And it has also allowed her now, she knows that enough, a little bit of it, that she's helped herself have other conversations by using that model.
So that's great. So to me, sometimes it feels like magic happens because people feel like it's impossible. I can't really figure out how to have this conversation. And then simply by walking them through, how are you feeling? How is the other key person and whatever you're trying to get done feeling? What would you like to feel? What would be great to feel, ideal to feel? And then trying to come up with strategies to get there. And then when they do it, it often sounds the way you just described, Lois, like what was I afraid of? Well, because the model walked you through it, you didn't need to be afraid anymore. And that, right. Thank you. That's great. Okay, why don't we go to you, Tamara?
Sure. So I am a third generation owner of a family business. My brother and I are business partners. We have several businesses that sit here together. So we call them the operating companies and then all of our real estate entities. And 4.5 years ago, my brother and I purchased the companies from our dad and cousin. And with transition from one generation to the next, there can be change, there can be lots of emotions, lots of feelings that come up within the family and also with the people that help move the businesses along every day. And so one of the things that I was excited to work with Chuck on and learn about this model for was to be able to have some of those conversations with staff and family members in this building and outside of this building in a more productive way. Obviously, like Chuck said, emotions are with us all the time. We're always feeling something, even if we're not actively listening to what we're feeling. And so being more aware of that, and then also being more aware of how those emotions might show up in different conversations and how we can actually work through them in ourselves, and then how we can also then influence those in others, like Lois was alluding to, how might that other person might be feeling going into a conversation where it might not be super easy things to talk about. And how do you want that person to feel? How do you want them feeling while you're talking with them? And how do you want that person to leave that conversation? I think are all really important pieces of, especially what we do as business owners, but just humans in general. I think it's important to be aware of that as you're walking through life. I've used this, like I said, with my family. I've used this with my children, with my husband, with my parents, along with all of my direct reports and even frontline workers here in all of our other companies. So I've really found this model to be useful. And as I continue to use it more, I continue to get better with it and even coach it to others here so they can start using it with their direct reports also.
So the idea, I think, is that it's really something once you learn it, and my goal and really in teaching about it at this point in my life is that I want as many people as possible to learn how to do this. Like the more you can teach it, the more others are going to learn it, and hopefully, as we expand this knowledge across the planet, it leads to world peace. That's my major goal, actually. Any specific examples, Tamara, that you can think of someplace in the workplace or someplace at home, either one?
Sure. My husband is a middle school assistant principal, and his group is going through learning about fierce conversations. And so it's been an interesting time in our house while he's learning about that and I'm learning about this. And we were having some conversations about what had come from one of his seminar sessions. And there was I don't know if there's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding that had happened in a breakout group. And he brought up, how he was feeling about it. And I said to him, well, is that a helpful feeling to have while you're sitting through these courses that your district is asking you to learn? And he kind of stepped back. I obviously wasn't super happy that I asked him that, but then kind of stepped back and said, well, no, if I'm sitting here, thinking about this, or stewing, I think was the word he used, about this, then I'm not open and actively listening to the next piece, that had already been moved on to. And I said, okay, well, how, in that situation when something like that comes up, how would you want to feel about that? And he said, I would love to be able to acknowledge that maybe that's not the way I would have had that conversation to begin with, but accept that, okay, this has happened. I can set this aside. I can come back to it later if I'm still feeling the way I'm feeling about it. But I'd like to try to feel more calm and more focused on what I'm really sitting there for, and not allow myself, we would call that triggered or spinning sometimes. And so not allow myself to get triggered or start spinning in that instance. And I said, great, how do you think that would be something that you could do, when you get in that situation again, or if that comes up in, tomorrow's session, how do you think you could change your focus? And he just talked about, really kind of creating a mantra, if you will, of, this is information that I need to be learning. This is going to be helpful when kids come back in the building, or staff comes back in the building. And so this is really information that will be helpful to me. I need to stay focused. So staying focused was something that he was trying to create for himself, for her mantra, to really not allow himself to start kind of going down a road that wouldn't be helpful for him or anybody else in the session. We didn't quite get to that end piece of how do you want that other person to feel. But I think, it helped him in that regard of taking a step back and understanding like, well, yeah, everybody gets angry or, worked up about things at times, but is that helpful? And how can I change my perspective, still understanding that that's not going to be something that makes me happy. That's going to be something that I'm, I don't like. But I can change my perspective to continue moving on and being productive and effective in what you're doing in the moment, instead of getting caught up in something and then really losing the opportunity for growth and learning.
So it seems to me one of the things that I try to teach is that certain events trigger you. Now, this is not, I don't know how often something like that happens, but if your husband can get triggered and then lose focus of what he needs to be paying attention to, then I think the script needs to be a bit different in terms of what your self talks about. That's one of the things that I try to teach is that, the next time, if you know that there's certain events that trigger you and then the trigger shows up in your head as certain words that drive certain feelings, can you change the script? Can you change what you say to yourself the next time it comes up? And can you actually prepare a script that you want to just repeat to yourself about when this happens? I have to remember that, yes, I'm unhappy about the circumstance, about what I just heard about, but I don't need to think about that now. I may want to write it down so I come back to it later. But the reason I'm in the room is to learn about this other information, and I'm distracted and not learning about this. So that's not healthy for me. If I want to talk to the other person about the situation that I thought was problematic, I need to set that aside and do that outside of the class that I'm learning. You know, I mean, it could be anything. It could be something at home with, you know, where do we have triggers? Well, we have them with our siblings. We have them with our spouses, our partners, our business partners, with certain people at work, with certain things that just happen almost on automatic, like when somebody taps your knee. You know, it's a reflexive action. But you can change the reflex by, if it's something that goes off in your head and certain words and thoughts appear, change them. Consciously decide to change them. But the whole idea of this emotion roadmap is that you can be proactive. I have a radio show that I do. It says, the emotion roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel. Many people think you have to deal with the feelings that you have. It's kind of like you got to play the cards you were dealt. Well, it's true in some instances. If you've lost someone, you're going to grieve. There's no way of getting around that. But in other instances, they're more malleable. It's more possible that you can actually change how you're feeling when what you're feeling isn't helpful. And then you have choices. What do you want to feel instead? Well, why not pick what's ideal to feel and go for that and try to figure out how to get there? Oh, great. Thanks, Tamara. And Robert, you're up.
Sure. My name is Robert Weintraub. I am the head of business development and client relations for a company called Your Work in Progress. That organization does a combination of executive and senior sales recruiting, along with sales effectiveness, change management consulting, and also a lot of career coaching and associated collateral elements. As well, I have an organization called Neurodiverse Solutions, which specifically caters to adults on the autism spectrum who need both career and life solutions in a place, in a setting where they're often underserved. This experience for me, it's kind of multifaceted, but it came at a time in my life where I really didn't recognize just how much help on a personal and a professional level I might have needed. One gets caught up in this day and age, kind of the quote unquote post-COVID now era that's being spoken about, and everything that's associated with it has had a huge impact on everyone, and certainly me myself. This experience has not only allowed me to meet some wonderful, successful people like Tamara, Lois, and Chuck. I've been able to get beyond some of my own narcissism, some of my own delusions of grandeur, to be quite honest, to realize, a bit more about who and what I am and how meaningful that could then be to other people, especially those who I work with on the spectrum, who are in a lot of ways very similar to me and just need that added edge and that attaboy or a girl to get where they want to go. So, for me, this has been just a fantastic opportunity to get a bit more self-understanding, to learn from others, and to be able to not only apply it in the workplace, but also in my own personal life as well.
Thanks, Robert. Do you have something, again, another specific example of something that may have happened in the workplace that you could share?
Sure. It's been life impacting because Your Work in Progress is a founder-run organization. The two founders happen to be my father and myself. So just being able to have the conversation about this experience with him has been a bit of a game changer as far as trying to move a company forward, but also where the applications can be substantive for our clients. That's been meaningful. But I think in some ways, even more importantly, with what I would consider to be my passion project, Neurodiverse Solutions, I've been able to work with what I would call my primary candidate, albeit they're all great. A gentleman named Robert, and being able to go through this experience and once a week, if not more, share not only what we've spoke about, what I've been able to learn, but how it could impact his life, how it can potentially apply directly to his career, what he aspires to be moving forward. And it's been impactful, meaningful. And for a person who struggles with his own emotions, but really more his ability to articulate them, kind of going through this experience through me by proxy has been one of the most meaningful situations, things that he's ever gone through in his life. So it's just been great across the board, and I'm thankful.
It's so nice because one of the things that I really value is to try to make a meaningful, positive difference in people's lives if I can. All of us can benefit from tools that help us to manage our own internal experiences of emotion, as well as what we learn about trying to influencing others. Any other thoughts any of you might want to share in closing?
Well, I kind of anticipated again that going over a multi-month period of time and sharing these experiences would be productive and cathartic. It would be somewhat special to me. Through kind of a combination of business and professional things, I don't think that I ever knew how meaningful it might be. And it's not just the information that one learns that's on paper, which is fantastic and life-changing. It's this experience, this personal / professional experience that we've all been able to go through, that's meant so very much. Incredibly appreciative for having had this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Robert.
I think the experience over multiple weeks of meeting and having coursework, if you will, or actual lessons to go through, but then all of the extra that comes along with it, right? The really being able to walk away from a session with this group of people and put it to use is it's amazing. And that's where you see it really come to life. And I think by continuing to do work with groups like this, you're well on your way of, having peace on earth. Because the more, if you look at just each one of us going to one other person, right, and talking to them or teaching them about this, which it's more than one for each of us, that's an incredible impact. And who wouldn't want to be able to understand how to take control of what's going on inside when you're dealing with people, since that's what everybody does every day, no matter what your line of work or where you live. That's what you do when you're here.
Thanks, Tamara. How about you, Lois? You want to close it out?
Yeah, I'd also like to echo on what they've just shared as well. I mean, the whole experience, given the amount of time that we've been meeting, it's been several months. And one, we've been able to be very vulnerable and share as a group. When we first came together, we were complete strangers. We had the one common denominator of Chuck. And it's more than just like reading what the content is, but then you get to actually go and take it out and apply it and then come back and share, and you learn more from that. And it's been a game changer for me. I've been using it with my grandkids. They're little and they'll, how are you feeling right now? And how would you like to feel? How do you think your sister feels right now? How would you like your sister to feel? And it really helps them stop and think about their own behavior and whatever is driving their little body. And sometimes they're like, I don't know how I feel. So I think introducing it to at a very young age and having that language and just talking about it, because for me, and I don't know about the rest of you, it's not something we were necessarily taught like to pay attention to. We go to school and we have our curriculum, everything we learn there, reading and math and history, but we haven't really had a platform to help us learn about our emotions, which really is, to me, like a barometer telling you something that's going on in your world. So it's definitely been a game changer, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
And that concludes our show. So this is WPKN 89.5 FM. This is Chuck Wolf. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of each month, 12 noon for 1 hour on WPKN. Listener-supported radio. Bye.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government
come together.